Well done, ladies. We're halfway through this study. I pray that the Lord has been showing you ways in which he has made you a light into this world. This week we looked at the hidden light. And in the same context that Jesus calls us to be lights to the world, he also gives us a warning. I think you'll find as you read Jesus' stories and the parables that he told, he oftentimes gives us instructions of what to do and warnings of what not to do. And this week we looked at the warning of not to hide our light. And the example he gave us was not to put our light under a bed or a basket, which seemed odd because in that day and age there was no electricity, they didn't have battery-powered flashlights, so they would have oil lanterns or candles. And you wouldn't put an open flame under a bed or basket because the risk of a fire. I think this illustrates that not only that our lights would be extinguished if they were under a bed or basket, but that there could be destructive consequences as a result. You know, we all struggle with fear, even me. We all struggle with the fact that we want to hide our light and not be put out on a stand. Being put out on a stand is uncomfortable. It's hard. It's risky. Even when the Lord asked me to write this study, and through the whole process of writing and publishing and marketing, it has been super uncomfortable for me. And there are many times that I have just been too scared or I just wanted to give up. I think you'll find when the Lord calls you to do something, to be his light, oftentimes we're going to be faced with fear, with discouragement, and we have to think beyond ourselves and rely on him to give us the strength and the courage that we need. You know, this week we looked at several biblical characters and stories of people who faced fear. And today I want to share with you another one of those stories, that of Elijah. See, Elijah was a prophet of God in the time of King Ahab. And King Ahab was a very wicked king. In fact, in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 33, it says, Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. Okay, that's a lot of wickedness, because if you recognize the kings before King Ahab, there was still a lot of evil and wickedness going on. And to say that King Ahab did the most, well, that's pretty wicked. And so because of his wickedness, the Lord brings a consequence, and he brings Elijah to call down a severe drought on the land for 3 years. And he takes Elijah and he hides him because Ahab is so mad he's going to kill him. And so he hides Elijah in the wilderness next to a stream. So Elijah has water, and he has the ravens bring him bread every day. I mean, isn't that amazing? And then after that, he takes Elijah to a widow, who again he miraculously provides bread through filling up of jars of oil and flour every day during that drought. And in the 3rd year, God calls Elijah to confront Ahab. And this would take a lot of guts, because Ahab is still angry at Elijah for this drought, and he still wants to kill him. So Elijah goes with courage to Ahab and challenges him and says, we're going to build 2 altars, and we're going to see whose God is the one true God. So the prophets of Baal build their altar and put a sacrifice on it, and Elijah has his altar with his sacrifice on it. And the prophets of Baal, they call on their God. They keep shouting, they cut themselves, they go on and on for hours and hours, all day long. And of course, nothing happens. And then Elijah drenches the altar in water and prays to the Lord. And immediately fire comes down from heaven and burns up everything. And the result is that everyone falls to their knees and acknowledges God as the one true God of Israel. And they take those prophets of Baal and they kill them. The Lord has done a great victory. And you would think at this moment Elijah would be so ecstatic. He would be so excited that the Lord has done all these miraculous things, that he has made a name for himself. But in the next minute, you will see that Elijah is fleeing for his life, and he is terrified. So we're going to look at today 1 Kings chapter 19, 1 through 4. The first verses, 1 through 4. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belonged to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." You see, Jezebel was Ahab's wife, and she was a very wicked woman as well, and she had already killed many of God's prophets. So her threat was real, and Elijah did have reason to fear and to flee. But you'll see that right after, he knew that God would provide for him. Before the Lord had taken him and hid him, he could rest in the Lord, but instead he gave in to his fear, and he ran away. And he even became so discouraged, he said, "Take away my life. Why am I even here?" I think life is like that, isn't it? One minute you're walking in victory, you're like so excited, you have seen God move, and then next you're running away in fear. You're in discouragement. You don't want to go on. You know, I want to bring up 3 points about this story. And the first is that fear is not a gauge of our Christianity. All men and women face fear. Even the strongest believers, Moses, David, Elijah, they all faced fear. But it's what we do with that fear, how we allow God to move despite our fear. Seeing God move in our weakness will not only increase our faith, but will bring him the glory. See, we're not doing it in our strength. We're doing it in his. He gets the glory when we are the weakest. In 2 Corinthians 12:9 it says, "But he has said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be these courageous men and women who never fear and who always know what to do. We just have to give ourselves willingly to the Lord and allow him to do his work with us and use us and be willing and continue despite the fear and the weakness that we face. Which brings me to my second point. The more you walk in obedience to God, the more times you will face opposition and the more times you will face fear. You see, Elijah was only in that position because he was obedient to God, because he confronted Ahab, because he allowed God to use him to show himself to be the one true God, and he killed those prophets of Baal. That's why Elijah his life was being threatened. You know, when the Lord uses you, when you are his light, when you are calling out sin, when you are doing what is right, people will oppose you. They won't like it. They won't like that you are calling them to truth and light when they're living in sin and darkness. You know, I think we have to recognize the times that we are in. We're going to face more and more opposition. And will we stand up for what is right and true in the face of that? We looked at this week. You're going to be hated. The world is going to hate you. But we still have to stay strong, relying on the Lord and his goodness and his strength to give us the courage that we need to be his lights. And the cool thing, the thing I love about this story is how God responds to Elijah. So I want us to look at 1 Kings chapter 19, the next verses 5 through 18. Okay? Let's see how God responds to Elijah's fear. And so Elijah lay down and slept under the broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank and went in strength to the food of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it." And he said, "Go out and stand on that mount before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountain and broke in pieces the rock before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left. And they seek my life also to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return your way to the wilderness, to Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Abel-Maholah, you shall anoint to be the prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. And yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that have not kissed him." So you see here, God does not chastise Elijah for his fear. He doesn't give him a consequence. He doesn't yell at him. No, he loves him. He provides for his needs. He brings him angels to minister to him, to give him food and water, to strengthen him and encourage him for the journey onward. And not only that, he provides for him a successor, Elisha, and tells him that Elisha will continue his ministry. You know, the beautiful thing is that the Lord is there when we fear. He is giving us strength. It's as David learned when he pronounced in Psalm 28:7, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to him." You can trust in God when you know he loves you, when he knows he's going to take care of you and provide for your needs. That's when we can surrender our lives to him, because we can trust in the Lord's goodness and his care for us. You know, Elijah never died. The fear that he faced of death, it actually never happened. He was one of the only people who got taken to heaven without dying. The Lord provided for him greatly, and he learned to surrender his life to God. Despite the time and time again he would face those threats and those fears, he continued to serve the Lord. So how does this relate to us? Well, sometimes it's scary to be a light, to stand up for our faith, to do the things that the Lord has called us to do. But will we trust in the Lord for his provision in those times? You know, in college, during a summer, I went to the Ukraine for a month on a mission trip. And this mission trip, what we would do is we went into an orphanage and took over for the workers there so that they could have the month off, and we took care of the orphans. And I was in charge of about 20 10 to 13-year-old boys for that month. And I loved those boys. They were so sweet. And every night I would tuck them into bed, and I would kiss them on the cheek and pray over them. But this didn't come without risk. You see, almost all the boys had hand, foot, and mouth disease. And if you're not familiar with that, it's like a rash, a terrible rash that's on your mouth and your hands and your feet. And I didn't want to get that. We were in the middle of nowhere. I didn't want this uncomfortable disease. And I could have let my fear of that stop me from loving them. But then I recognized that my fear was selfish. I was just thinking about my own self, my own needs and my own wants, my own comfortableness. Those boys needed that love. They needed me to tuck them in and kiss them goodnight. So I did every night. And I never got the disease. That's just a little way of this show that we can allow our fear to keep us from loving people. We can allow our fear to not share God's love and his light. But when we release that fear, when we love and we care more about people's needs, their eternities, than our own comforts, we can move past that. And we can love them the way that God wants us to love them. So, Mom, I challenge you today to walk as lights, to take off that whatever you're hiding underneath, to ask the Lord, how can I move forward today in this and not fear? Ask him for strength if you're struggling with that. But ask the Lord to move you and to use you despite our fears and despite our inadequacies, to use us to be his lights. So be strengthened and encouraged today, sister. I pray that you will move forward and shine his light this week. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week.